Hello, and welcome back to the Law of Attraction Tribe podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Keith, and it is the week of Halloween. So I thought it would be fun to do a kind of like a spooky, scary episode talking about the paranormal. But I have to put my quantum spin on it. So, if you've been listening for a while, I'm very, very much into quantum physics, quantum manifestation, the secrets of the universe, all that kind of stuff. And ever since starting and putting together Quantum Catalyst, which is my 6 month mastermind where we dive deep into quantum manifestation, I have uncovered so much from various physicists, both modern and in the past, that just it's blown my mind on what is possible and what the theories are that are going around. And when I was thinking about doing this episode and, just sharing some of the paranormal experiences I've had, I was just going to leave it at that. But then I thought, there's so many things that cross my mind where I think the paranormal, what we consider paranormal, overlaps with the quantum field. And I want to dive into that today. So let's start out with some of the creepy paranormal things that have happened. And I want to know if you can relate to this. I feel like I hear a lot of these things a lot from people who, are just normal, not necessarily like a psychic or a medium or anything like that. I think we've all had these strange experiences that we can't really explain or fully understand. And I don't know, I just feel like there's more to what's going on than just like seeing a ghost or something, for example. So there's two like core memories that I have from when I was a kid that I guess you could consider paranormal. The first was I was spending the night at my aunt's house, and my cousin and I were on it was like a pull out bed, like their couch pulled out into a bed in their living room. And at some point in the night, my cousin, I guess, went upstairs into her room. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night because I kept hearing people talking. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's so late. Like they're still up, thinking like, my aunt and uncle are up. And I just heard it and it like wasn't stopping. And I open my eyes and I see this man who was wearing a hat. What I like the memory that I have now, from what I can remember, is that it wasn't a hat that someone would wear nowadays. This was like maybe like a 1920s era hat, like one of those wide brim hats, and sitting at the table. And I just remember thinking like, oh, they must have a friend over. And like, it's so late. And why are they still here? And why are they still talking? But the only person I could see was this guy sitting at the table. And I kind of like did one of those where you pretend that you're sleeping, I didn't really know like what to do because I didn't see, my aunt or my uncle. And eventually I fell back asleep. And I remember in the morning telling my aunt about this, and she was like, "Oh, you must have had a dream. We didn't have anyone over. Everyone was sleeping." And I said, "No, like I saw someone," and she's like, "Yeah, it must have been a dream." And then I was like, "Yeah, but I heard all throughout the night, like I heard people talking." She was saying it was probably the neighbors, like they can be loud sometimes. And, so like that was that. But it was one of those core memories where it just never left me. Like I remember it so clearly. And I mean, could it have been a dream? Yeah, like it could have, but not like any other dream I've had, right? Like it seemed so real. And there were so many details that I remember that you typically don't remember with a dream. So that was like the first thing. And then the other one was when I was a kid, I had bunk beds and I was sitting or I was sleeping in the top bunk, which I normally didn't do. I always slept on the bottom bunk, but for whatever reason, I decided I wanted to sleep on the top bunk that night. And maybe this is why I only slept on the bottom bunk after this, but I was in the top bunk and I'm laying there and I still had not fallen asleep. Like I had laid down to go to sleep, but I was still wide awake. And I hear this whisper, Stephanie, like that, like really like Stephanie. And I remember thinking like, oh, okay, this is my brother. And he, snuck in without me seeing, and he's trying to play a prank at me because he loved doing that, like playing pranks or scaring me or whatever. And so I thought, I'm going to get him. And I was really, really, really quiet. And I was like creeping down like the little ladder, like the side of the bunk bed to get down. And then I jumped out and I was like, ha, like trying to scare him. And there was no one there. And I remember like the second I realized no one was there, it was like I still get chills, like the hair on the back of my neck is like standing up right now. I freaked out. I mean, pure terror filled my entire body. And I just went running as fast as I could and like ran into my parents' room screaming. And for a really long time after that, I didn't want to sleep in my room. Like, I didn't want to be by myself at night. I would go in my mom's room, and I never slept in the top bunk after that. And again, like, it wasn't a dream because I wasn't even asleep yet. Like, I wasn't even tired. I was still wide awake. And I don't know. I remember that and just that whisper and realizing, like, I heard it so crystal clear, but then realizing that that was not my brother and no one was there was absolutely terrifying. And I've also had the same thing happen with my closet where I heard the same whisper. And I remember waking up my parents and like telling them there was someone in my closet and them opening the closet and the Teddy Ruxpin dolls. So there was this like teddy bear doll that could talk back in the day. And I remember them just being like, oh, it must have just been that. It probably went off. Like maybe the batteries are going out. So from that moment on, I was terrified of Teddy Ruxpin dolls as well. And we had to like hide mine because I didn't want to have anything to do with it. So I had those experiences and that really, really shook me, really freaked me out. And then years later, like as an adult, when I first started kind of talking to mediums, I was talking to Vanessa Stewart, who she has been on the podcast before. And she was telling me how when I was a kid, I used to talk to spirits like all the time, like have full on conversations. And she was like, "Did you have imaginary friends?" And I was like, I don't recall any of this. Like, no. Like all I recall was I got freaked out, as a kid with that whispering. And I think that's like really shut me off from all of this. And she's like, "Well, ask your mom about it." And I asked my mom, and my mom's like, "Oh yeah, like I could leave you in a room for a really long period of time. Like you would just be talking away with all of your imaginary friends." And according to Vanessa, like these weren't imaginary friends. I was connecting with the other side. Now, whether or not that's true, I don't know, but it's just interesting that I don't recall it. I think I subconsciously blocked all of that out when I got so freaked out with what happened in my room and realizing like I was hearing something that wasn't there that I couldn't see. So so that was kind of the main things that I could recall consciously from my childhood. So fast forward, I have kids and Alexis has had some creepy things too, where like when we lived in Illinois, she saw someone in her closet and she actually thought it was my husband. And so she's like talking to him and wondering why he's not responding, why he's not moving. And then when she realized it wasn't, like, got really freaked out. So I remember that. And then Amelia, like, she's the one that's always telling me she's seeing things. And a few weeks ago, well, it was probably a few months ago at this point, we were sitting down and we're doing some homeschool stuff. Like, I'm trying to explain something to her. And she keeps looking over my shoulder, but like looks freaked out. I mean, looks like stunned. And I'm like, what's going on? And I look behind me and there's, I don't see anything. There's nothing there. This was the middle of the day. And I was like, what are you looking at? And she's like, sorry, I keep getting distracted. And I was like, well, what are you getting distracted by? And she was like, well, I don't want to tell you because it's kind of scary. And I was like, well, you can tell me, I'm not going to be mad. And she said, I just don't want you to be scared. And I'm like, okay, well, what are you seeing? And she said, I saw this. It's like this, like one of those like shadow things. And I was like, oh, yeah, like we all have a shadow. And she's like, no, not like that. There's someone like standing there, but it's a shadow. And I just like, she says this and like the chills are running down my spine. And I'm like really getting kind of freaked out. But I don't want to scare her, obviously. So I'm like, oh, nope, it's definitely just a shadow that's being cast off of something. And let's go explore. Because she could not concentrate until she found out it was like next to where our pantry is. And she's like, I think it went in the pantry, and she could not focus until we looked in the pantry. So I get up and I walk over to the pantry and I'm like freaked out at this point. And of course, there's nothing there. So I said, you know what? Has this happened before? And she said, yeah, all the time. And I said, oh, really? And does it scare you? And she said, well, sometimes it does. It's kind of creepy. And I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. And I have a 528 tuning fork. And I said, when you hit this fork, it makes a sound and a vibration. And it's the vibration of love. And so anything that's bad or mean or feels scary, it gets scared away. It goes away when you hit this fork and the whole room fills up with love. And she's like, really? And I said, well, actually, yeah, this is 528 hertz and it's called like the love frequency. And so I said, okay, let's go and we're going to hit it in that area. So I showed her how to hit it and she hit that. And she's like, okay, follow me. And I was like, where are we going? She's like, we're going to all the other areas where I see it in our house. I'm like, what? What? And she's like, oh, yeah. So we run upstairs and the very first spot she goes is exactly where I saw something prior. And I'm thinking, oh, great. Are we seeing the same, shadowy like figure? So we hit it there. We go in her room and we hit it. And the thing about her room is Alexis used to be freaked out about her room. This was before Amelia was born, when Alexis was younger. She couldn't go to sleep if that door was open. The door had to be closed and she would just stare in that direction if it was open, and it freaked her out. And I kind of got the same vibe. So it was just interesting because she like spent a lot of time in there with the tuning fork. And like, so we went to all these places and then she felt a lot better. And I felt a lot better too. And it was, I think it was Lisa Campion that was on the podcast. And she told me that. She was like, if you want to cleanse the energy of a space, and you don't want to use sage or, you don't want to burn something, which I typically don't like to do, with the kids and the dog and everything, use a tuning fork, a 528 tuning fork. So there's a little tip if anyone, especially if you have kids, that really worked well for her and it made her feel so much better. And now every time this happens, which it happens pretty often with her, she just knows like, oh, I can just hit this and like it dissipates and everything's fine. And it does seem to really help. And it, even if it's all placebo and it calms her mind, whatever, like it's a great thing to give her something that she can use to like banish away the scary things, right? And it makes me feel better too. And it's just a good frequency in your house. So anyhow, with what I saw in the same area where she like ran upstairs, this, I don't even remember how long, it wasn't like that long ago, but, and I think I talked about it on the podcast before, but I was in the like loft area. So upstairs, we have kind of like this open area, and then all of the bedrooms are around this area. And I was in there and I see my husband go in the master bedroom. And immediately I'm like, what the hell? Because he was supposed to be out in the pool with the kids, and I could hear the kids in the pool. Like I could hear them splashing and stuff. And I'm like, no way did he just leave the kids in the pool. Like there's no way. Like what? And so immediately I go and I follow him in the bedroom to be like, what's like, are they out there by themselves? Like what's going on? And there's no one there. And I run in the bathroom and in the closet, and there's no one there. And so then I'm like, okay, how is this even possible? Like, I know for a fact I saw him. And I open up the window because our window, the pool, you can see from our bedroom window, and he's in the pool with the kids. And I'm talking like this is a second after I saw him. I like immediately followed him in the room. So I got really freaked out. And I was just, and it was kind of like confusing too, because it wasn't like I saw a shadow, like I saw him and the way he walks and his stature and everything go in there. So this is where I will get into where I think that quantum physics comes into play. And I think, I don't know, this is just my theory. And I don't know that I fully believe it, but it just that specific incident made me think of this. So, Hugh Everett was a physicist that came up with like his interpretation of the double slit experiment. So, the double slit experiment, by the way, if you don't know what I'm talking about, go on YouTube, type in the double slit experiment. I think the most popular video, it's called Dr. Quantum, and it's like a cartoon, but it's just a great visual of what this experiment was and how it completely turned the scientific world upside down. Nobody knew what to make of it because basically this experiment it makes everything we know or we think we know about science and physics and our physical world and it throws it out the window. And so because of that, they had to come up with a separate category called quantum physics to explain what's happening at the quantum level, like the smallest level of our, quote unquote reality. So anyhow, the double slit experiment basically shows that everything is a wave of infinite possibility, infinite potential. When you get to the smallest particles that make up you or I or anything that we see that we think is physical matter, it's all made up of these quantum particles. The smallest are called photons. They're actually little tiny particles of light. So what happens is they are in a superposition, which means it's like everything, every possibility. They're not really in reality. It's like this state of infinite. And when you observe the particle, that's when it collapses the wave into one physical matter. Like it makes a decision and it collapses into what we know as physical matter. So that's the double slit experiment. And we get the observer effect from that. Well, Hugh Everett has what's called the many worlds interpretation. So what he thinks is he doesn't think that the wave ever collapses into one specific outcome. He thinks that when when the wave is observed, it splits into like multiple different realities. So basically, every decision, every action, every thought you make, every choice, you're branching off into another reality. And so there's just like infinite realities of your life everywhere. And every time you make a decision or do anything, it branches into another reality. That's called the many worlds interpretation. And that's where you hear people talk about parallel universes, parallel realities. And there's a lot of physicists that believe this theory or think that there's something to it. I don't know that I believe it or not. But when stuff like that happens, that's what I think. I think that, what if I really did see my husband walking into the room and it was just a slip or a glitch where I had a quick, preview of this other reality or other dimension or frequency. Like I slipped into that for a brief second. That would explain paranormal activity, in my opinion. That would explain like all of it because, you're everything is energy and everything is, we know that there are multiple dimensions. Um, and we know there are different frequencies. Just like when you turn on the radio, there's multiple radio stations. They all exist right here, right now, but you can tune into one or you can tune into the other. So why would it be so hard for us to think that there's all of these realities all existing simultaneously right here, right now, but you can tune into one or you can tune into the other? And so maybe, again, this is just a theory, maybe that is what is happening in these instances where we hear something and we look and no one's there, or we see someone, but it's impossible for them to be there. Maybe and we slipped into, had a brief glimpse into that reality. Maybe there was an overlap. This would also explain things like deja vu. When you feel like, oh my gosh, this happened before, and you have this like unexplained phenomena that you've experienced that before. So that's kind of what I'm thinking is happening. And I also think that would explain the Mandela effect. So the Mandela effect is fascinating. If you haven't heard of it before and you want to go down a rabbit hole, go just ask ChatGPT about it or they've got movies about it. There's so many videos on it. But it's basically where a large portion, so it's not just one person or a handful of people, like a large portion of the population remembers something one way and another large portion remembers it a different way. And we see this all the time, all the time. It's called the Mandela effect because the first time, at least, it was sort of given some credibility and talked about publicly was with Nelson Mandela, where a huge portion of the population remember him dying. Another huge portion of the population remember him going to prison at the same time. And their version or remembrance of this event was like so detailed. Like people remember the funeral and remember watching it years before he actually died, like stuff like that. So that's why it's called the Mandela effect, because that was the first big phenomenon when it happened. But now it like more and more, like things that you remember from your childhood, like the monocle on the Monopoly guy's, the little monocle thing that he wore. Well, I guess he didn't wear it, even though like I remember that, and it seems like most people remember that from their childhood. But if you look it up, it's like, no, he never had a monocle. Things like that. There's a lot of instances. And it keeps growing more and more and more of those instances. So the way that I look at it is one possibility is that this many worlds interpretation is accurate or somewhat accurate. And maybe we've weaved into a different reality where the past wasn't that way. We remember it that way because we shifted. We weaved into this other, frequency, where everything's basically identical, but like there's little tiny things that are different or off. So I think that that could really explain what's happening in some of these instances of not just paranormal, but like UFO, UAP sightings, all of that. I think there could be some type of glitch or slipping with different frequencies. So I don't know. That's my interpretation of it. I kind of think there's something to it. I would love to know what you think. Like, message me on Instagram at Law of Attraction Tribe because I just love like hearing different theories. But the more and more I dive into it and listen to these different physicists whose whole life work is around these topics, I kind of realize like there's a lot of I don't know, there's a lot of credibility to what could be going on here. And there's a lot of people in the scientific community that fully believe that there are multiple realities. And then, it kind of goes hand in hand, but that we live in some type of a simulation or holographic reality, which I used to think was so kooky. I'm like, that sounds so ridiculous. But the more and more you dive into it, the more and more it makes sense, which is just wild. So I asked my chat GPT what the probability is that we do live in some type of a like simulation or matrix or holographic reality. And okay, it says that, let's see here. Let me look up exactly what it says. Okay. So it gives like all of this information, right? And then it says my summary estimate. So given the above, which is, I'm not going to read all the information, that would take forever. If I had to give a ballpark estimate with current knowledge, there might be on the order of a 30 to 50% chance that we live in some form of a more advanced simulation or computer coded reality if you adopt the assumptions of the simulation argument. But if you adopt more conservative assumptions that post human civilizations may choose not to simulate or that simulation of our complexity is infeasible, then the probability might be much lower, perhaps 10 to 20%. So, what it's saying is there's like a 10 to 50% chance, just depending on where on the spectrum you kind of fall, that we do live in some type of a simulated reality, which I think is pretty wild. I think those odds are pretty big considering it sounds like such a crazy out there concept. And another one that this would be like a fun one to go and research is James Gates Jr. So he talks about this and how he found algebraic patterns in the mathematics of string theory and how that corresponds to error correcting codes that you would see in like internet coding, like binary code at the deepest fabric of our being, of our society, of our world. There's code, binary code, ones and zeros. Um, so it's pretty interesting when you start to break it down. And that's why more and more I start to think that could be what's going on. And that could be, what we're tapping into sometimes with these different experiences that we have that we think are just, I don't know, just paranormal or whatever. Oh, and I have one more. And this one I know for a fact I talked about a long time ago on the podcast when Aiden was a baby. He was still in a crib. And I posted on Instagram back then too, the picture of it, because I woke up in the middle of the night hearing a baby screaming, like screaming. And it woke me up out of my sleep. But as soon as I came to and was like awake, I didn't hear it anymore. So I thought, okay, maybe I was dreaming, which I mean, when you're used to a baby crying at night, you're in the parenting survival phase. It's like, yeah, I definitely could have been hearing things. I could have been dreaming that for sure. So I didn't want to run into his room and like wake him up in case I was just dreaming and I wasn't hearing any screaming. So we had a camera in the room pointed at the crib. So I pull up the camera and I see an outline of like a person, like a shadow figure, like leaning over his crib. And again, like I immediately just assumed I must be dreaming or my eyes haven't adjusted. Like when you first wake up, like maybe my eyes are still adjusted. So I don't know why, but my reaction was to do a screenshot because I thought, then I'll know for sure. Later, when I'm fully awake, I can look at this and know for sure if I'm seeing things, if I was sleeping, whatever. So I take a screenshot and I run in there and he's wide awake, but he's smiling and like perfectly content. And there's no one, in his room, obviously. And so when I went back to the screenshot, there was definitely a shadow figure leaning over his crib. And I showed it to a bunch of people. I posted it on Instagram and I had so many people reaching out and they're like, there's definitely something there. And I got a whole range of explanations on what it could or could not be. But here's the other part of this story. When I was pregnant with him, remember, I had him and Amelia back to back. So, and this was all like during COVID because he was born in 2021. So I started getting really, really nervous because I was just thinking, how am I going to handle all this? Like Amelia was still so little and so dependent on me for everything. She was still a baby. And like, how was I going to deal with a newborn when I have like a 1 year old and then Alexis was like homeschooling and I was getting really anxious about it and felt very overwhelmed. And I was talking to this woman who's out in Sedona, who is like a Akashic Records reader, energy healer. I don't really know exactly what her like title would be. But anyhow, I was talking to her and explaining to her, that I was really worried about this baby and I just felt I could feel this like anxious, overwhelmed energy. And she told me, she said, I don't want to like make your anxiety worse, but he is going to be highly sensitive. And when he's a baby, like he's going to cry a lot. He is going to be colicky. He is going to be crying, and you're going to feel like you're going to lose your mind. And she said, however, your mother-in-law, which this was like right after my mother-in-law passed away, she said she wants you to know that she's here to help. And all you have to do is ask for her help and support. And she said, for example, he may be screaming and crying and you feel like you're going to lose your mind. Put him in his crib and ask her to help, and she can come and stand by the crib and give him some calming energy and like nurture him and give him some love to help calm him down so that you can have, a moment's break. And so once this happened, and especially like just the energy and everything with this figure, I thought like this is exactly as she had said. And this is my mother-in-law, and she was comforting him because he was crying. Because I did. I said, please, like comfort him, nurture him. If I am sleeping or, whatever, like feel free to comfort him. And so that's what I think is a possibility. So that's where I go back and forth with this many worlds thing and what's happening. Is there a little bit of both happening? Is there paranormal activity? But then there's also some glitches or slips in and out of different realities. I don't know. I don't know. I don't think anyone truly knows, but it's all interesting to me to think about and ponder. And I would love to know, especially if you've had experiences like this, what do you think? And do you think that, you know, like what's your gut telling you? What was the energy that you were feeling? That kind of thing. Because that's the other thing. So when I was a kid and that happened, where I heard whispering, that freaked me out. Hair on the back of my neck, chills, freaked me out. Now, the crib thing did not. I should have been, but the energy did not feel at all bad, negative. No part of my intuition was like telling me something's not right. It felt like loving energy. And same thing when I saw, my husband or what I thought was my husband walking in the room, I didn't feel like scared. I just was confused. But it wasn't like that feeling that you get where it's like you need to run, like something's off, something's bad. And I get those feelings. Like I've had that happen before. But those times I didn't. I didn't feel like there was something I needed to be scared of. It was more just confusing, like what's happening here. And I think that tells a lot too. I think there's so much that our body can sense that our mind can't pick up on. So that's another reason why I think that it wasn't anything scary, creepy, paranormal that I have to be like worried about. But I do think obviously are instances where I get creeped out. And so I think maybe there's both going on. I don't know. But anyhow, I thought this was a fascinating topic to talk about for Halloween, and I would love to hear your stories. So again, the best way to touch base is go to Instagram. I'm at Law of Attraction Tribe, and I check all of my messages. The only time I really don't, or I just delete them, is when I get spammed. So please don't spam me. But I check pretty much all the rest of them. And I would love to hear, like, have you had an experience and what was your gut feeling and what do you think is going on? Because this stuff just fascinates me. I love it. I want to know more. I'm like so hungry for understanding all of these things that our human senses can't pick up on. So anyhow, that's my little interpretation of what's going on. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this episode and have a happy Halloween, and I'll see you back here next week.